All right, let us start the last part 4 of The Tale of Despereaux by Kate DiCamillo. So, last when we left our mostly hero, he had just had some soup from the cook who was illegally making soup out of the distress of her soul. He has armed himself with a needle and is equipped with a spool of red thread that he got from the threadmaster, and is on a quest to find the Princess P and to rescue her. Oh, into the dungeon he goes. Chapter 46. Mouse blood, yes. Sinister. Despereaux stood at the top of the dungeon stairs and peered into the darkness that waited for him below. Oh, he said, oh my. He had forgotten how dark the dark of the dungeon could be, and he had forgotten too its terrible smell, the stench of rats, the odor of suffering. But his heart was full of love for the princess, and his stomach was full of cooked soup, and Despereaux felt brave and strong, as you do after you've had a good meal. Good time of year for soup. And so he began, immediately and without despair, the hard work of maneuvering the spool of thread down the narrow dungeon steps. Down, down, down went Despereaux tilling, and the spool of thread. Slowly, oh, so slowly they went. And the passage was dark, dark, dark. I will tell myself a story, said Despereaux. I will make some light. Let's see, it will begin this way. Once upon a time. Yes, once upon a time, there was a mouse who was very, very small, exceptionally small, and there was a beautiful human princess whose name was P. And it so happened that this mouse was the one who was selected by fate to serve the princess, to honor her, and to save her from the darkness of a terrible dungeon. This story cheered up Despereaux considerably. His eyes became accustomed to the gloom, and he moved down the stairs more quickly, more surely, whispering to himself the tale of a devious rat, and a fat serving girl, and a beautiful princess, and a brave mouse, and some soup and a spool of red thread. It was a story, in fact, very similar to the one you are reading right now, and the telling of it gave Despereaux strength. He pushed the spool of thread with a great deal of gusto, and the thread, eager perhaps to begin its honorable task of aiding in the saving of a princess, leapt forward and away from the mouse, and went down the dungeon stairs ahead of him, without him. No, cried Despereaux. No, no, no. He broke into a trot, chasing the thread through the darkness. But the spool had a head start, and it was faster. It flew down the dungeon stairs, leaving Despereaux far behind. When it came to the end of the stairs, it rolled and rolled, until finally, lazily, it came to a stop right at the gnarled paw of a rat. What have we here? Said the one-eared rat to the spool of thread. I will tell you what we have, said Botticello Rimorso, answering his own question. We have red thread. How delightful. Red thread means only one thing to a rat. He put his nose up in the air. He sniffed. He sniffed again. I smell. Could it be? Yes, most definitely it is. Soup. How strange. He sniffed some more. And they smelled tears. Human tears. Delightful. And I also detect the smell. He put his nose high into the air and took a big whiff of flour and oil. Oh my, what a cornucopia of scents. But below it all, what do I smell? The blood of a mouse. Unmistakably mouse blood, yes. Ha ha! Exactly, mouse. Botticelli looked down at the spool of thread and smiled. He gave it a gentle push with one paw. Red thread. Yes, exactly. Just when you think that life in the dungeon cannot get any better, a mouse arrives. Chapter 47. No choice. Despereaux stood trembling on the steps. The thread was most definitely gone. He could not hear it. He could not see it. He should have tied it to himself when he had the chance, but it was too late now. Despereaux's dire situation suddenly became quite clear to him. He was a 2-ounce mouse, alone in a dark, twisting dungeon full of rats. He had nothing but a sewing needle with which to defend himself. He had to find a princess, and he had to save her once he found her. It's impossible, he said to the darkness. I can't do it. He stood very still. I'll go back, he said, but he didn't move. I have to go back. He took a step backward. But I can't go back. I don't have a choice. I have no choice. He took one step forward, and then another. No choice. His heart beat out to him as he went down the stairs. No choice. No choice. No choice. At the bottom of the stairs, the rat Botticelli sat waiting, and when Despereaux stepped from the last stair onto the dungeon floor, Botticelli called out to him as if he were a long-lost friend. Ah, said Botticelli, there you are. Exactly. I've been waiting for you. Despereaux saw the dark shape of a rat, that thing that he had feared and dreaded for so long, finally step out of the gloom and come to greet him. Welcome, welcome, said Botticelli. Despereaux put his paw on the needle. Ah, said Botticelli, you are armed. How charming. He put his paws up in the air. I surrender. Oh, yes, certainly, exactly. I surrender. Said Despereaux. Yes, said Botticelli. You. He took the locket from around his neck. He began to swing it back and forth. Please, go on. I don't want to hurt you, said Despereaux. I just need to get by you. I'm on a quest. Really, said Botticelli. How extraordinary. A mouse on a quest. Back and forth went the locket. A quest for what? A quest to save the princess. The princess, said Botticelli. The princess. Everything seems to be about the princess these days. The king's men were down here searching for her, you know. They didn't find her. That goes without saying. But now a mouse has arrived, and he is on a quest to save the princess. Yes, said Despereaux. He took a step to the left of Botticelli. How inspiring, said Botticelli. He lazily took a step to his right, blocking Despereaux's way. Why the hurry, little friend? Because, said Despereaux, I have to... Yes, you have to save the princess, exactly. But before you save her, you must find her, correct? Yes, said Despereaux. What if, said Botticelli, what if I told you that I know exactly where the princess is? What if I told you that I could take you right directly to her? Said Despereaux. His voice shook. His paw on the needle trembled. Why would you do that? Why would I do that? Why would I help you? Why, to be of service, to do my part for humanity, to aid in the saving of a princess. But you're a rat, supplied Botticelli. Yes, I am a rat, and I see by your trembling that the greatly exaggerated rumors of our evil nature have reached your oversized ears. Yes, said Despereaux. If, said Botticelli, swinging the locket back and forth, if you allow me to be of assistance, you will be doing me a tremendous favor. Not only can I do a good deed for you and for the princess, but my actions will help to dispel this terrible myth of evil that seems to surround rats everywhere. Will you let me assist you? Will you let me assist myself and my kind? Reader, was it a trick? Of course it was. Botticelli did not want to be of service. Far from it. You know what Botticelli wanted. He wanted others to suffer. Specifically, he wanted this small mouse to suffer. How best to do that? Why, take him right directly to what he wanted. The princess. Let him see what his heart desired, and then, and only then, faced with what he loved, would Despereaux die. And at the end of it all, how tasty the mouse would be, seasoned with hope and tears and flour and oil and thwarted love. My name, little friend, is Botticelli Remorso, and you may trust me. You must trust me. Will you tell me your name? Despereaux. Despereaux Tilling. Despereaux Tilling. Take your paw from your weapon. Come with me. Despereaux stared at him. Come, said Botticelli. Let go of your needle. Take hold of my tail. I will lead you to your princess. I promise. What, reader, in your experience, is the promise of a rat worth? That's right. Zero, zip, nada. Goose eggs. But I must ask you this question too. What else was there for Despereaux to hold on to? You are right again. Nothing. And so the mouse reached out, and he took hold of the rat's tail. Chapter 48. On the tail of a rat. Have you ever had hold of the tail of a rat? At best, it is an unpleasant sensation, scaly and cold, similar to holding on to a small, narrow snake. At worst, when you are dependent upon a rat for your survival, and when a part of you is certain that you are being led nowhere except to your death, it is a hideous sensation indeed to have nothing but a rat's tail to cling to. Nonetheless, Despereaux held on to Botticelli Rimorso, and the rat led him deeper and deeper into the dungeon. Despereaux's eyes had, by this point, adjusted quite well to the darkness, though it would have been better if they had not, for the things he saw made him shiver and shake. What did he see? He saw that the floor of the dungeon was littered with tufts of fur, knots of red thread, and skeletons of mice. Everywhere there were tiny white bones glowing in the darkness, and he saw in the dungeon tunnels through which Botticelli led him the bones of human beings, too, grinning skulls and delicate finger bones, rising up out of the darkness and pointing toward some truth best left unspoken. Despereaux closed his eyes, but it didn't help. He saw as if his eyes were still open wide, the bones, the tufts of hair, the knots of thread, the despair. "Ha ha, exactly," Botticelli laughed as he negotiated the twists and turns. "Oh yes, exactly." If what was in front of Despereaux was too horrible to contemplate, what followed behind was perhaps even worse. Rats. A happy, hungry, vengeful parade of rats, their noses up in the air, sniffing, sniffing. "Mouse," sang out one rat joyfully. "Yes, oh yes, mouse," agreed another, "but something else too." "Soup," called out another rat. "Yes, soup," the others agreed. "Blood," sang a rat. "Blood," they all agreed together. And then they sang, "Here, mousey, 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 here, little mousey." Botticelli called out to the other rats. "Mine," he said. "This little treasure is all mine, gentlemen and ladies. Please, I beg you, do not infringe on my discovery." "Mr. Rimorso," said Despereaux. He turned and looked behind him and saw the rats, their red eyes and their smiling mouths. He closed his eyes again. He kept them closed. "Mr. Rimorso," he shouted. "Yes," said Botticelli. "Mr. Rimorso," said Despereaux. He was crying now. He couldn't help it. "Please, the princess." "Tears," shouted the rats. "We smell tears, mousey, we do." "Please," shouted Despereaux. "Little friend," said Botticelli. "Little Despereaux, I promised you, and I will keep that promise." The rat stopped. "Look ahead of you," he said. "What do you see?" Despereaux opened his eyes. "Light," he said. "Exactly," said Botticelli. "Light." Chapter 49. What do you want, Miguel? Again, reader, we must go backward before we go forward. We must consider for a moment what had occurred with the rat and the serving girl and the princess down in the dungeon before Despereaux made his way to them. What happened was this. Rescuro led the Pea and Mig deep into the dungeon to a hidden chamber, and there he directed Mig to put the princess in chains. "Cool," said Mig. "She's going to have a hard time learning her lessons if she's all chained up like." "Do as I say," said Rescuro. "Maybe," said Mig, "before I lock her up, her and me could switch outfits, so we could start in already with her being me and me being a princess." "Oh, yes," said Rescuro. "Certainly. A wonderful idea, Miss Miggery. Princess, take off your crown and give it to the serving girl." The Pea sighed and took off her crown and handed it to Mig, and Mig put it on, and it slid immediately right down her small head and came to rest quite painfully on her poor abused ears. "It's a biggish thing," she said, "and painful like." "Well, well," said Rescuro. "How do I look?" Mig asked, smiling at him. "Ridiculous," he said. "Laughable." Mig stood, blinking back tears. "You mean I don't look like a princess, she said to the rat. I mean, said Rescue, you will never look like a princess, no matter how big a crown you put on your tiny head. You look exactly like the fool you are and always will be. Now make yourself useful and chain the princess up. Dress-up time is over. Mig sniffed and wiped at her eyes and then bent to look at the pile of chains and locks on the floor. And now, princess, he said, I'm afraid that the time for your truth has arrived. I will now tell you what your future holds. As you consigned me to darkness, so I consign you, too, to a life spent in this dungeon. Mig looked up. Ain't you going upstairs to be a serving maid? No, said Rescue. Ain't I going to be a princess, then? No, said Rescue. But I want to be a princess. No one, said Rescue, cares what you want. As you know, reader, Miggery Sow had heard this sentiment expressed many times in her short life. But now in the dungeon it hit her full force. The rat was right. No one cared what she wanted. No one had ever cared. And perhaps worst of all, no one ever would care. I want, cried Mig. Shh, shh, said the princess. Shut up, said the rat. I want, sobbed Mig. I want. What do you want, Mig? The princess said softly. Eh? Shouted Mig. What do you want, Miggery Sow? The princess shouted. Don't ask her that, said Rescue. Shut up, shut up. But it was too late. The words had been said. The question at last had been asked. The world stopped spinning and all of creation held its breath, waiting to hear what it was that Miggery Sow wanted. I want, said Mig. Yes, shouted the pea. I want my ma, cried Mig into the silent, waiting world. I want my ma. Oh, said the princess. She held out her hand to Mig. Mig took hold of it. I want my mother too, said the princess softly, and she squeezed Mig's hand. Stop it, shouted Rescue. Chain her up, chain her up. Go, said Mig. I ain't going to do it. You can't make me do it. I got the knife, don't I? She took the knife and held it out. If you have any sense at all, said Rescue, and I heartily doubt that you do, you will not use that instrument on me. Without me, you will never find your way out of the dungeon, and you will starve to death here, or worse. Go, said Mig. Then lead us out now, or I'll chop you up into little rat bits. No, said Rescue. The princess shall stay here in the darkness, and you, Mig, will stay with her. But I want to go upstairs, said Mig. I'm afraid that we're all stuck here, Mig, shouted the princess, unless the rat has a change of heart and decides to lead us out. There will be no changes of heart, said Rescue. None. Go, said Mig. She lowered the knife. And so the rat and the princess and the serving girl sat together in the dungeon as, outside the castle, the sun rose and moved through the sky and sank to the earth again and night fell. They sat together until the candle had burned out and another one had to be lit. They sat together in the dungeon. They sat and sat. And reader, truthfully, they might still be sitting there if a mouse had not arrived. Chapter 50, in which the princess says his name. Princess, Despereaux shouted. Princess, I've come to save you. The Princess P heard her name. She looked up. Despereaux, she whispered, and then she shouted it. Despereaux. Reader, nothing is sweeter in this sad world than the sound of someone you love calling your name. Nothing. For Despereaux, the sound was worth everything. His lost tail, his trip to the dungeon and back out of it and back into it again. He ran toward the princess, but Rescue, baring his teeth, blocked the mouse's way. The princess cried, Oh no, rat, please don't hurt him. He's my friend. Mig said, Don't worry, princess. I'll save the Macy. She took the kitchen knife. She aimed to cut off the rat's head, but she missed her mark. Whoopsie, said Miggery Sow. Chapter 51. What is that smell? Ow! Screamed Rescue. He turned to look at where his tail had been, and as he did, Despereaux drew his needle and placed the sharp tip of it right where the rat's heart should be. "Don't move," said Despereaux. "I will kill you." "Ha, ha, ha!" Botticelli laughed from the sidelines. "Exactly." He slapped his tail on the floor in approval. "Absolutely delightful. A mouse is going to kill a rat. Oh, all of this is much better than I anticipated. I love it when mice come to the dungeon." "Let me see," said the other rats, pushing and shoving. "Stand back," Botticelli told them, still laughing. "Let the mouse do his work." Despereaux held the trembling needle against Rosciro's heart. The mouse knew that as a knight, it was his duty to protect the princess. But would killing the rat really make the darkness go away? Despereaux bowed his head ever so slightly, and as he did so, his whiskers brushed against the rat's nose. Rosciro sniffed. "What is that smell?" he asked. "Mousy blood," shouted one rat. "Blood and bones," shouted another. "You're smelling tears," said Botticelli. "Tears and thwarted love." "Exactly," said Rosciro. "And yet there's something else." He sniffed again, and the smell of soup crashed through his soul like a great wave, bringing with it the memory of light, the chandelier, the music, the laughter, everything, all the things that would never, could never be available to him as a rat. "Soup," moaned Rosciro, and he began to cry. "Boo!" shouted Botticelli. "Sss!" hissed the other rats. "Kill me," said Rosciro. He fell down before Despereaux. "It will never work. All I wanted was some light. That's why I brought the princess here, really. Just for some beauty, some light of my own." "Please," shouted Botticelli, "do kill him. He is a miserable excuse for a rat." "No, Despereaux," said the princess. "Don't kill him." Despereaux lowered his needle. He turned and looked at the pea. "Boo!" shouted Botticelli again. "Kill him! Kill him! All this goodness is making me sick. I've lost my appetite." "Go!" shouted Mig, waving her knife. "I'll kill him." "No, wait," said the princess. "Rosciro," she said to the rat. "What?" he said. Tears were falling out of his eyes and creeping down his whiskers and dripping onto the dungeon floor. And then the princess took a deep breath and put a hand on her heart. I think, reader, that she was feeling the same thing that Despereaux felt when he was faced with his father begging him for forgiveness. That is, P was aware suddenly of how fragile her heart was, how much darkness was inside it, fighting always with the light. She did not like the rat. She would never like the rat, but she knew what she must do to save her own heart. And so here are the words that the princess spoke to her enemy. She said, "Rosciro, would you like some soup?" The rat sniffed. "Don't torment me," he said. "I promise you," said the princess, "that if you lead us out of here, I will get cook to make you some soup, and you can eat it in the banquet hall." "Speaking of eating," shouted one of the rats, "give us the mousey." "Yeah," shouted another. "Hand over the mousey." "Who would want him now?" said Botticelli. "The flavor of him would be ruined. All that forgiveness and goodness. Blech! I, for one, am leaving." "Soup in the banquet hall?" Rosciro asked the princess. "Yes," said the pea. "Really?" "Truly, I promise." "Go!" shouted Mig. "Soup is illegal." "But soup is good," said Despereaux. "Yes," said the pea. "Isn't it?" The princess bent down before the mouse. "You are my knight," she said to him, "with a shining needle, and I am so glad that you found me. Let's go upstairs. Let's eat some soup." And reader, they did. Chapter 52, Happily Ever After. But the question you want answered, I know, is did they live happily ever after? Yes and no. What of Rosciro? Did he live happily ever after? Well, the Princess P gave him free access to the upstairs of the castle, and he was allowed to go back and forth from the darkness of the dungeon to the light of the upstairs. But alas, he never really belonged in either place. The sad fate, I'm afraid, of those whose hearts break and then mend in crooked ways. But the rat, in seeking forgiveness, did manage to shed some small light, some happiness into another life. How? Despereaux, reader, told the princess about the prisoner who had once owned a red tablecloth, and the princess saw to it that the prisoner was released, and Despereaux led the man up out of the dungeon and to his daughter, Miggery Sow. Mig, as you might have guessed, did not get to be a princess, but her father, to atone for what he had done, treated her like one for the rest of his days. And what of Despereaux? Did he live happily ever after? Well, he did not marry the princess, if that's what you mean by happily ever after. Even in a world as strange as this one, a mouse and a princess cannot marry. But they can be friends. And they were. Together they had many adventures. Those adventures, however, are another story, and this story, I am afraid, must now draw to a close. But before you leave, reader, imagine this. Imagine an adoring king and a glowing princess, a serving girl with a crown on her head and a rat with a spoon on his, all gathered around a table in a banquet hall. In the middle of the table there is a great kettle of soup. Sitting in the place of honor, right next to the princess, is a very small mouse with big ears, and peeking out from behind a dusty velvet curtain, looking in amazement at the scene before them, are 4 other mice. "Mon Dieu, look, look," says Antoinette. He lives, and he seems such a happy mouse." "Forgiven," whispers Lester. "Cripes," says Furlough. "Unbelievable." "Just so," says the Threadmaster Hovis. "Just so." And reader, it is just so, isn't it? The end. Coda. Do you remember when Despereaux was in the dungeon, cupped in Gregory the jailer's hand, whispering a story in the old man's ear? I would like it very much if you thought of me as a mouse telling you a story. This story, with the whole of my heart, whispering it in your ear in order to save myself from the darkness, and to save you from the darkness too. Stories are light, Gregory the jailer told Despereaux. Reader, I hope you have found some light here. And there you go, that's the book. Listener, I hope you have found some light here. And then in the midst of the pandemic, that the read-alouds are something that you're enjoying. Presumably you are if you keep tuning in and listening. And if not, you don't have to. Anyways, tomorrow I have a busy night, so I'll be taking a night off. But Tuesday I'll be back. So I shall see you online then with yet another new book. I have another one that I'm reading through. But we'll see. I might do a series called At Home in Mitford, which is rather charming and very much up my alley. So we'll see. Anyhow, new book on Tuesday. Have a great remainder of your weekend. Have a great Monday. See you Tuesday. Stay safe. Stay healthy.